This morning's reading is entitled, I Want to Be with People by Reverend Dana E. Worsnop. We need not think alike to love alike, wrote 16th century Unitarian Francis David. Often people say that they love coming to a place with so many like-minded people. I know just what they are getting at. And I know that they aren't getting it quite right. I don't want to be with a bunch of people who think just like me. I want to be in a beloved community where I don't have to think like everyone else to be loved, to be eligible for salvation. I want to be with people who value compassion, justice, love, and truth, though they have different thoughts and opinions about all sorts of things. I want to be with independent-minded people of good heart. I want to be with people who have many names and no name at all for God. I want to be with people who see me in my goodness and dignity, who also see my failings and foibles and who still love me. I want to be with people who feel their interconnection with all existence and let it guide their footfalls upon the earth. I want to be with people who see life as a paradox and don't always rush to resolve it. I want to be with people who are willing to walk the tightrope that is life and who will hold my hand as I walk. I want to be with people who let church call them into a different way of being in the world. I want to be with people who support, encourage, and even challenge each other to higher and more ethical living. I want to be with people who inspire one another to follow the call of the Spirit. I want to be with people who covenant to be honest, engaged, kind, who strive to keep their promises and hold me to the promises I make. I want to be with people who give of themselves, who share their hearts and minds and gifts. I want to be with people who know that human community is often warm and generous, sometimes challenging and almost always a grand adventure. In short, I want to be with people like you. Let me start by saying, with my sermon this morning, by saying how happy I am to be with you today. I am honored to participate in the conversation about the ways this church community I love can move forward in the midst of a time of transition. And there is more than one transition going on right now. The COVID-19 pandemic is entering its third year, and we're all pretty worn out from it. As of today, daily infection and death rates are low, But as we have all come to understand with prior lulls, this does not mean that the thread is over. Another transition is the retirement of a dear minister and friend to many of us, the Reverend Kimmy Regal. And now, an unexpectedly timed transition, the end of the interim ministry of Reverend DeBeck. Many transitions right now. As Diana said a few minutes ago, sometimes it is an imperfect process. And church, when it's at its best, is a beautiful, beloved, imperfect process. For any community of people who care about each other to survive, people in that community observe a shared set of values and principles. For churches in the Christian tradition, this often means the recitation of certain creeds. And those of you who have attended Christian churches in the past may remember the Nicene Creed, which not only describes the beliefs of Christians, including the literal death and resurrection into heaven of Jesus, but conveys the common faith and connections Christians have to each other. Included in the Nicene Creed is the line, "In one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, we acknowledge one baptism for the remission of sins. We look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Amen." That ain't us. We don't have one creed or covenant of relationship that we share across our UU church world because each church community defines its own. We have our shared principles, which, depending on which UU congregation you're in, currently number 7 or 8, and that's a whole other discussion. Feel free to ask a fellow UU after the service about the 8th principle conversation going on, if you don't know about it. But our principles are not the guideposts we use to determine how we connect with each other. Although our principles can set the tone for how we connect with each other, sometimes they're hard to figure out. But writing out and detailing how we connect with each other, that opens up a space for us to hold each other in beloved community in times of difficulty and strife. It allows us to be accountable to each other. In other words, we can write out how we will hold each other close when times aren't easy and when conflict arises. Emotions can run high and people's feelings can get hurt during times of change. And what a covenant does is it ensures that people don't cause unnecessary harm to others in the community. Many in this community have suffered in many ways during the last 2 years. Many of us have lost people we love. COVID and other illnesses have taken people out of our lives, sometimes permanently. And those losses, those missed coffee hours, those deaths, those times when we could have been together, but we're not, can make us sad and angry and confused. We are human beings, and as animals on this fragile planet, our default is to respond to change with primal feelings of fear and sorrow and anger, and those feelings can cause damage. They can be expressed because we are human beings, and part of our role as UUs with each other in beloved community is to find ways to be together sincerely, and to be together in love, but to make sure that we don't harm each other. We are creatures who want to feel relief. We want to live on a habitable planet that we leave for our children and grandchildren. We want to believe that our political system is stable and democratic and inclusive, where all have a say, an equal say. And when those things aren't available, loving people can get frustrated and express raw and understandable feelings, and sometimes express those feelings in ways that cause harm. And that's where a covenant comes in. We're not talking about rules. The part about covenant, the part about principles, the part about being sincere with each other is very often we create guidelines for how to interact with each other and we fail because we're human. But covenant establishes guardrails so that we do our best not to harm each other. I did research on some of the best covenants in UU churches. There's a lot of debate on which one is the best, but I did find one from All Souls Church in Brattleboro, Vermont. And it has one of the best and simple covenants of relationship that I've ever seen. And it reads as follows. We build our church on a foundation of love and covenant with one another, to freely explore our values and honor our diversity as a source of communal strength, to accept responsibility for our individual acts and promote justice and peace, to celebrate the joys of discovery, embracing the fullest measure of our humanity, to communicate with kindness and support, to serve with compassion and commitment, to openly share our laughter and tears, and to show reverence for the divine in all that it is. And just as Christians would say at the end of the Nicene Creed, I want to say amen at the end of that. That's the covenant in which I want to live. In our UU tradition, churches are a safe haven for everybody. Regardless of ideological points of view, I know that's difficult to accept these days. The gulf between left and right, Democrat and Republican, is getting wider. It's getting more difficult to understand people who think differently. Regardless of self-perception of place on the gender and sexual spectrum, UU churches are where everyone can come and expect to feel safe. That means safe from judgment based on how much money each of us has, who and how each of us loves, and how each of us lives. And in these times of change, conflict can arise between people of good intention. Reverend DeBeck is gone, and you may feel upset. You may feel relieved. You may not care. But his early departure definitely upset a schedule for the church. And the ripples from unexpected surprises can come up in ways that you may not realize. I feel it's important to thank those who are in elected leadership in the church right now, who are making these difficult decisions. I, as someone who loves that church from afar, thank you deeply for your work and dedication. Leaning into covenant means finding a way to openly share our laughter and tears, as it described, the sample covenant that I described. It's an avenue to make sure that we can get our feelings out, that we can be human and vulnerable with one another. In the next months, and the transitions in the church, in the world, with COVID numbers hopefully staying down, but likely going up at least one more time, there will be more strife. Things are going to continue to be difficult. And things are going to continue to change. That's okay. One thing I've learned working in the healthcare industry as a chaplain these last 2 years is that nothing is going the way that anyone can plan for. And I am grateful to be part of a faith that encourages me to seek truth within my atheism and my humanism. I am grateful to be part of a faith that welcomes Christians and Muslims and nuns and Buddhists and Taoists and people of so many backgrounds and so many places they're going to come to the same table and celebrate life. I'm also grateful to be part of a faith where I can say to my fellow cisgender white males of privilege that it's okay for us to be quiet sometimes when others of less privileged classifications in our society and in our churches need to be heard. Building a covenant together can allow us to celebrate our differences. I'm thinking of the first time that I became a member of the church almost 20 years ago at Northwest. I became acquainted with so many loving, caring people. And one of those people was a woman by the name of Jane Williams. I would imagine some of you remember her. She was a wonderful person who came to church most Sundays. She served on the board of moderators in various roles. And over time, I would see her and members of her family at various social functions. And I considered her a very good friend. Jane was an old lady, a retired Republican, and I was a idealistic Democrat. Our perceptions of the world were vastly different. She once said to me that the reason she was part of Northwest is because people respected her differences, even though most people at the church thought so differently about politics and affairs of state than she did. Jane died just over 12 years ago. And her memory and her legacy and the conversations that we had continue to influence the way I view my role in churches. She's one of many reasons I decided to go to seminary. She embodied the holy contradictions that I love to see in people. I don't have to understand you to love you. You don't have to understand me to love me. We can build a land of joy. We can be together virtually and hopefully more in person in the next months and years to come. If we are true to the ideal of loving each other with guardrails in place. I encourage each of you to ask yourselves, what do you want from this church community? What do you need from fellow travelers of life? What gifts and talents and money and human connection do you have to offer? And how can everyone connect and bring our true selves and feel safe and loved? The answer collectively to those questions will shape how this community can covenant together in the future. I encourage you to embrace what is possible with each other. Lift up your sacred stories, share them, share who you are in a loving and intentional way. Remember that yours is not the only story, not the only perspective. Speak your truth while ensuring you allow equal space for the truths of others to be shared. And remember that this type of sharing is divine. May this church community continue to thrive as one of loving people who recognize each other's shared gifts, shared place together in the search of this shared divine. May the COVID numbers continue to decline. May the work of this church in finding its next minister be conducted with love and respect. And may we all bask in the covenant of hope for the future. Amen. Please, I guess, hymn or hum with us if you're in person. The rest of us can sing and dance virtually. Hymn 1018, Come and Go With Me. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we as a people of faith be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Words from the Reverend Joe Cherry.